So I think we might as well get started. It's that clock is a little slow. It's 6:30. I am thrilled to see so many people here. My name is Ellen Joyce. I am a history professor here at Beloit College and a member of the board of the Beloit Historical Society. The Historical Society was so excited by the success of the documentary about Beloit that PBS Wisconsin put out last fall that we said, what about all the other stories? They only had an hour, and thought that it would be fun to just get people talking about their stories of Beloit, and whether it's a long time ago or quite recently, there's no everything's history, right? So we will have had 3 sessions this spring. We are hoping to continue this. We had Otha Williams talking about growing up in the Merrill neighborhood as an African American, and then his very interesting career in the school district that I hadn't known about. And we had Matt Goodwin last time talking about being Irish in Beloit. And what I learned was that even though the Irish, his family had been here like 5 generations, but that even in his father's childhood, even though his family had been in the area, there was still discrimination and prejudice against even Irish immigrants in, I guess we'd be talking about the 20s, I'm not sure. And so I wanted to talk about the Italians too, because that's another group I knew about. And while our distinguished speaker, Frank Crivello, did not actually grow up in Beloit, he knows everybody, which is clear because—
So does Tom.
Okay, and it is clear because this is the biggest audience we've had so far, and I suspect many of you were drawn here to hear these 2 guys talk. And from what I have experienced, they can and will talk at great length. But
I have former students here. They could probably attest to that as well.
And with great interest and eloquence and all that. I didn't mean to. I also hope that this really can be a conversation, and that maybe once you've done your formal presentations, people will speak up about their own experience. We're recording this, so we hope to preserve it as a kind of record of what this community has been about, what it is now. And over to you.
Well, let me just say something real quick about your ending statement over there as well about recording this, because I feel very strongly, I'm sure a lot of people, not all of you in this room, feel very strongly too about younger people and learning about your grandparents, your great-grandparents, coming over on the boat and how many days did it take and so forth and so on, trying to assimilate into American life. And a lot of times those stories are lost. And something like this, I think, preserves some of that history, not only in Beloit, because obviously we're all in Beloit right now, but all of us have other stories, maybe from where we're from or where your grandparents started from. I know Tom in the back's got some pictures up on the easels there. And the pictures down below are the pictures of my mother's mom, my grandmother, and then my father's mom, and my dad is about a 2-year-old over there. I've been in Beloit now since 1979. I came to Beloit Catholic to teach, and I got to know, and I'll get more into this later on when we get to St. Paul's and the founding of St. Paul's and all of this, which you have to thank the Irish. Some of you probably don't know that. I never knew that, but we'll talk about that later on. And I got to know a lot of families, and it just seemed right. I was going to explain that I didn't grow up in Beloit, but I'm from the far east side of Beloit called Milwaukee. So I'm from Milwaukee's east side, heavy Italian neighborhoods. And very quickly, all my grandparents came from northern Sicily. I put a map up here on the board, right about half an hour east of Pierce Palermo. And they came from a little fishing village right over here. I know in talking to a number of people from Beloit, Marsala, which is over in this part of Sicily, a number of Beloiters came here from that part of Sicily as well. And so I grew up in a very Sicilian household, food and grandparents still speaking Sicilian. I've got something passing around here. I can start it over here too. There's a couple of these. The Sicilian translation and the Italian, just to show you that it's a dialect of some of the words that you hear in pure Italian and how they say it in Sicilian. So we'll get to some of those stories. And like Ellen said, we are very much interested in having your stories. I know some of you I had talked to before, like Tony Palermo over here. I know a lot of you have stories about growing up in Beloit, or I'm going to include South Beloit as well, because Gardner Avenue had a tremendous amount of Italian liquor stores and restaurants over there as well. So, Tom?
Yeah, my name's Tom Pulaski, and I was talking to my son last night, and he says, Dad, now listen, they're not going to believe that you have any Italian blood or Sicilian blood in you with a Pulaski for the last name. So he says, really stretch out the I at the end of Pulaski. And that will hopefully convince him. I'm proud to say it this way. I'm half Sicilian. Grandparents came from Aragona, and I have my great grandparents on my mother's side, Dominic Linares and his wife Margarita, who is a Carotlo, also came from that region. We have a deep history in the city. For me, though, Frank and I were joking about this. We're coming back to talk about this and also bring out stories for you folks. I left Beloit in 1965. My family sold their house on Harrison Avenue. We moved out to the Ledgers. They took a gamble on building out there. They didn't think they could afford it. And so I ended up in the Roscoe, then school district in Hononegah. But my dad took over the store in 1970 with Daryl Fenrick, and I graduated from Kinnickinnick in 8th grade in 72, and he says, you want money in your pocket? I go, yeah. He goes, you'll go to work. And Social Security wise, it paid off to do it at such a young age. But I grew up in the family store, like Frank, very tight nuclear family. Problem is, I'm the only one left here in Beloit area. Everybody else has either passed or they moved. I came from a family of 6 brothers and sisters, and one's deceased, and they're all spread out all over the country. So I stayed with teaching AP US History and Economics at Hononegah most of my career. I did go back there in 1980 and then retired in 2013, and then got reeled in by this young man to take 3 days a week for him when he was going through some health issues up at Clinton High School. So we taught essentially the same classes. We worked out well. I first met him in 1976. My mom was running a stopwatch for Alf Hare, who was the cross-country track coach here, and she had to do it for extra credit or whatever part of her grades. So I went up to see an indoor track meet in the old with the old clay track, and she, for some reason, brought Frank over and introduced him to me. I was a senior in high school, and he was a senior at Beloit College. So we fell out of touch and then fell back into touch, and things have gone pretty good.
His mom had to be one of the first non-traditional students when she came back to school here. I know you said that she went back to get a GED or something and then had kids and then decided to go back to school at that moment in time. So
I'm not doing something right here. There.
Oh, there we go.
To keep everybody on track, Frank and I learned this from teaching. Put an outline up, and it keeps a lot of sidebars from occurring when we want to stay focused in certain
And you don't
areas.
have to take notes either. So
I thought we start off with I'll give you a brief overview of my grandparents. It'll lead into my great-grandparents. And then Italian neighborhoods, no real defined neighborhoods, except for maybe Gardner Street, South Beloit. There was no true enclave of Italians concentrated in any one area in the city of Beloit, but we'll see that there was one area where there were some Italian families living. Then we're going to go into corner grocery stores, supermarkets, liquor stores, and restaurants, supper clubs, bars, beer distributorships, and the role of the church, Fairbanks Morse Company. And one I have very little information on, Jim Agati did provide me with some, was the Italian social clubs in the area. So as you look at this, if you've got stories, where would they fit in? Frank and I are more than willing to stop so you can talk and we can stand and listen to those stories. We've got until 8 o'clock, correct, Donna? A little after 8? 8:15, 8:45.
Don't encourage these guys, I'm telling you. We'll be having breakfast tomorrow morning. That's true. They've been doing this since January, so you can be careful.
Let's say there will be a hard stop at 8, but there are refreshments.
Okay,
and people
that's good.
could
I was going to bring some Umbrellata and red wine, but
Hey, I went to Valley Produce for Italian cookies.
just a quick overview then. My background in Beloit here. There's my grandparents, Bill and Mary, ran the store. I'll give you some background information on them and the store itself. His full name was Philip Louis Salamone, and as I said, Aragona. Parents, Francis Buscemi and Louis Philip Salamone. Buscemi name, if anybody knows anything about the Rockford mob, Buscemi name is very popular with that mob, as well as the Zitos and the Zamutos. And even I had another uncle, Frank Salamone, who tended to dabble in the mob too. But I got a good story if it fits in later on about a situation with the mob, and they actually helped rather than hurt my grandfather. His siblings, I loved them all. I never met Giacomo. I did meet Giacomo. We called him Uncle Jack. Sarah, Dora, Margaret, Dean, and Rose. You can see he went through Ellis Island, young age, 16. His guardian, this is what I like. He had to have a guardian to get in along with his passport, was Frank Buscemi, and worked in a leather factory in Chicago. Then he finally made his way up to Rockford and worked for the Cacciatories as a cutter. Then from Rockford up to Beloit. He married my grandmother in 1927. And they lived way at the north end of Wisconsin Avenue, 1700 block. And then built their house in 1936 at the corner of Central and Chapin, just a block away, 2 blocks away from Strong Stadium. Interesting thing was during the Depression, he took a gamble and paid labor 25 cents an hour to build the house. So he's putting people to work. He extended a lot of credit at the store. I thought it was a great marketing ploy. You extend credit to people who don't have the money. When the economy turns better, they're going to remember you and shop at your store. My grandmother grew up in South Beloit. She was one of 4 siblings. We'll get to that later. He originally opened the store. You know what the Strong building is in Beloit, on the corner of State and Grand. If you go east from State Street, just to the left of the Strong building is where his first market was. He opened it in 1929 as Salamone and Company Palace Meat Market, and then he moved the business 2 doors west, 1935 to 412, and then finally 1955 he breaks ground at it's completed. It opens in 55, but he breaks ground in 54 at the current location, which is now the Carom Room, right behind the 615 Club. Forward thinker with the store. The whole first floor is flex core. That means he put a full basement underneath the whole store. And then he had the flex core, he had a terrazzo floor poured on top of it for low maintenance. Very forward thinking. All the generators were downstairs, the bakery was downstairs, the produce processing was downstairs, and that's where he kept all of our overstocked beer and empty pop bottles that were returnable at one time. Store was formerly known as Salamone Food and Bakery Corporation. Then he doubled the size of the store, and you'll see photos of this, eventually employing 52 people. He passes in 1987, and then my grandmother passed in 2004. I don't think I need to read through all this because we want to make plenty of time for everybody, but you can see how it went with my great-grandfather and my grandmother's side of the family. I like this. He comes over first with Margarita's brothers, Giovanni, Francesco, Antonio, and Zulo. He sends her $100 for her travel expenses. Once he gets here, she doesn't want to come. She wants to stay back with mom and dad. So she spends the $100. He turns around and pays her $100 one more time and says, "This is it. You come or you stay." He had an interesting life, making his way towards Beloit. Ended up on a chain gang in Tennessee for a little bit. Yeah, he did work in North Africa before coming here because a lot of men in Sicily who needed money would cross the Mediterranean to North Africa for the jobs. He and Margarita's brothers finally get jobs at Fairbanks Morse, working in the foundry as flask makers. I didn't know what a flask was, so I did a quick study up on it. But it was interesting that they were out in that huge foundry at the time. Where does this all lead us to? If you're a South Beloiter, you know, especially the corner of Wheeler and Ingersoll Avenue, there was once a grocery store there. That was Dominic Flannery's store. 1920. He started because one of his daughters, Elizabeth, my Aunt Elizabeth, begged him to open up a store. She would run the store while he's continued to work at Fairbanks. And when Fairbanks went downhill for a little bit because of the economy, he came back and took over the store himself. And and never went back to Fairbanks. I found this too, Vito Bufa, who will marry Elizabeth Linares, was originally engaged to Mary Jack Maloney. It's called off. She's far much older than him. And she ends up marrying Joe Baracco. If you know Baracco Distributing, and boy, all the pieces start to fall together. And then their only brother, Joe Linares, marries Catherine Martingilio. His first marriage only lasted about 24 hours. Yeah, it was not a good marriage. Or they packed a lot in and called it quits. So, first, Ariel, we're going to Frank, anything to add?
No, not yet.
Okay, is neighborhoods, and this is where we could probably get some help from people. This was sent to me from Jim Agati, and sorry for the misspelling of Rollo's there, Tony Rollo. But you can see Gardner Street from 251 all the way to South Park, and just a little past South Park down to Wheeler is concentrated with either residences or businesses.
What street is this here?
That's Gardner.
This is Gardner.
Okay. So South Park is located right here, and this would be Wheeler right here. I think where's Gap Booth's located? 7. So Wheeler's right in here.
May I say something?
Yes,
I had a great uncle that had Chicken Charlie's restaurant on Gardner Street, big old neon.
I've heard of that
And they had
place.
babies growing up, kind of closer to the western edge. I know it was on the south side of the street. I don't know when it went away.
When we get more into the restaurants, when Vito finally opens up Bufa's Supper Club, he had an interesting life too, up to opening the Supper Club. Stories I was getting, but also the research I dug into, I just found it, wow. You know, I had heard things, are they believable? Then you read, yeah, they're believable. The other area that had some Italians or Sicilians was the Central and Chapin Street area. This is my grandparents' house on the corner of Central and Chapin. And kitty corner were the Donatos on Central and Chapin. Then down the street, I don't remember the names, but there was like 2 or 3 other Italian families that lived on Central going south. Does anybody recall? Marino? Okay. Casucci's, were they there?
No.
No?
They lived out on.
Okay, this is what makes this good, is because I'm gonna need some blanks filled in as we go along. And Frank will probably do, but there was no true area where you could call it a true Italian neighborhood. And boy, though there was Italians or Sicilians living close enough to each other, you know, to have some type of contact regarding that. So we'll take a look at corner grocery stores, supermarkets, and liquor stores, and here's where we're going to need participation also in some stories, hopefully. That was the first ad for the store grand opening, March 8th, 1929. Anybody see any particular product that you're surprised is on there? Margarine. Margarine, you got it. 35 cents for 2 pounds of it. And yeah, it caught my eye when I first saw this ad, because at one time you couldn't get margarine in Wisconsin. You know, when I was a kid, and a Century Supermarket was making a killing with semi-trailer loads of it, selling it. Then once margarine came into Wisconsin, you could only buy butter by the stick. You couldn't buy margarine by the stick. So they were protecting the dairy farmers in the state with those type of laws. So this is our family market. My grandfather was smart, like a lot of Italians or Sicilians. You put the name into the building, and it doesn't really come out. The old front entryway. We never had light beer though on the door. We had it in the store, not on the door. Here he is breaking ground. My grandfather's got the shovel in his hand, groundbreaking of the addition to the store. You can see the A&P in the back, which becomes Domenico's Pizza. later on. And this house here, Frank and I were talking about this. That house actually sat on the store property. I thought it was the house across the street initially when I saw this one where the Golden Cove bar used to be, but it isn't. It's actually on the property. It'll come down. Two sisters actually own the parking lot at the store. And I can remember one time my dad and Daryl putting the pressure on them that they didn't lower the rent. They were going to seal up the front, and they own almost all the property on the east side of the store. They're going to switch the entryway on the store and let the sisters sit there with an empty parking lot. That didn't happen though, but they were looking at changing up things with the store. They could get a bigger parking area because they owned everything except the 615 and the Bride and Junior car lot. Some of you that maybe were kids or actually even a little bit older might remember the interior. The original store had the arched ceiling, and then the new part of the store had the flat ceiling.
Tommy said it's peaking at 52.
What?
At its peak at 52 employees.
Yeah.
Full time.
Yeah. And that leads to a quick sidebar story here. We were non-union. And one night my grandfather comes home, he's pulling in the garage on Central and Chapin, and he gets jumped and beat up. So my grandmother gets in the car and goes down to talks to the head don of the Rockford family and said, "We've never borrowed money from you. We've never asked any favors. We have stayed to ourselves. Why'd you have my husband beat up?" He says, "Mary, it's not us. It's the union." So from that point on for a period of time, a car would be parked outside their house with two guys in it. And as soon as he got into the garage safely, then the car pulled away and left. And it was two guys sent up from Rockford to look at it because we had a few relatives in the Rockford family. It was just amazing how that story also unfolded. But here's 35th anniversary promotion. My dad's on the left, and his father-in-law, my grandfather, on the right. And in 1970, the key is handed over to Daryl Fenrick on the left and my dad. Then my dad will leave the store in 1985. He sells his share to Daryl. And then in 1986, him and my mom hightail it to Vero Beach, Florida. There's a lot of Beloiters in Vero Beach, if you didn't know. And for me, it was fun to go down there in the wintertime and see all these people. Anything to add at this point, Frank?
No.
I just want to keep this stuff rolling.
Right, I understand.
Anybody have any stories? How many, any of you shop with your parents or you shop there yourselves at the store? Why didn't I notice you ladies, huh? What?
Remember Phil selling?
Yeah, I actually got along with him real well. I mean, he was quiet with me, but I remember I bought my first house, which was 836 Church Street, which Bill and Deb Dorr bought for me. That's the old Adams house. Alan and Arthur Adams grew up there. And my first wife and I went to the bank. We finally decided on that house, and we were smart. 15.5% interest rates at the time. I didn't want to pay rent though. I was done paying rent. After 8 months, I was done paying rent. An apartment in Roscoe. So we go to the bank. Thank God there was no computers, because the banker asked me how much do you have in savings with a straight poker face. I said $7,000. And so they get done with my credit report and everything. We leave the bank. It was up at the mall, the plaza. And my wife's tugging on my arm. She goes, "We don't have $7,000 in the bank." I said, "We'll have $7,000 in 2 days." She goes, "How are we gonna do that?" I go, "We're gonna go see Papa right now." So he was home. He wasn't working at the store by then. I go in the living room. He's in his easy chair smoking his El Producto cigar. And I go, "Papa, I got a favor to ask you." "What is it, my son?" No, he didn't. I had to kiss the ring, everything, you know. But no, I said, I need 5,000. I was upfront with it. I need $5,000. What for? I need it for a down payment on a house. See me tomorrow. So I went back to the house the next day. He handed me a check for $5,000. And in true Italian Sicilian fashion, a promissory note to sign. And I knew it wasn't going to be a gift. I knew it wasn't. I knew I had to pay it back. But he believed in me. I lived in the house most of my on weekends, senior year of high school and through college when I came home, because it sure beat going all the way out to Roscoe and then coming back into work. I could just go from there and walk down to the store and you know, get my hours in that I needed. But this is Dominic Lenari. He's quite an interesting guy, and that's the corner store. Now, do you see the first floor way to the left? The first, it's only one story, I mean, the one-story section, that used to sit on the corner. When he finally decided that he was going to go into business himself and not return to Fairbanks, he moved that over and put the two-story on top of the foundation. And so they were attached. I don't remember my great-grandma. I don't remember Margarita, but I do remember Dominic. And he himself, well, a little bit on him and Vito later on. Here's where the blanks can be filled in, hopefully by you folks. Morocco's grocery store. Who remembers that in here? And it's Tony, right? Do I have the right address?
I think as a kid, I would look at what's an address. I was looking at stores.
I was going into the old directories and looking up
Right on the
addresses.
bike, you didn't look at addresses, but I couldn't just look at the grocery stores.
If you got, this photo came out of the Century of the City book, okay? I'm a great stealer of other people's research. I better give credit though.
I live in the mother's house, Rocco House, over by Todd School, I am told. The house was built in 1917. And there's more stories with the Bracco brothers living on the corner and the tunnel underneath Milwaukee Road as well, so that'll come up later.
Sam Saladino, I'm thinking this ends up becoming the laundromat because the bigger stores had hands in the back, good.
I'm just raising my hand. They have a lot of questions
You
about
live in
your
Rose
house.
Morocco's house?
1610 Oakwood,
On the corner?
second one in.
With the little family room and the kitchen and the basement finished? It's on the corner.
It's second house from the corner, second house from the corner, right. Todd School would be to my, the house is behind me, it's right down the street over here to my right.
It's on a corner?
No.
Second house in, second house in.
Oh, no, never mind.
The house on the corner
They got it.
was owned by the Baraccos.
Oh,
Got it.
Okay,
Now they got it.
okay, good. Any other questions? Okay.
Yes.
The current building or the one that's now 815, what, auto body design or detailing, that is the building that pushes out closer to Gardner Street. I'll show you a picture when we get into the bars and supper clubs. They have right across the street. It's not Sam, but husband and wife. I got their names here. They had the Palladium and Saladino restaurant and liquor store. Some of these names you might recognize.
Whatever it is. Oh, that's century, yeah.
I think that's Lloyd H. is Lloyd Holmberg. So that's the add-on right here, which is now 815 detailing on South Park in Gardner.
Frank Carappo was the store manager back then, right?
I've got a picture of him, I think, on the next.
Frank is, and then Angie Parma would have been,
There he is.
head cashier was Angie Parma.
There's, yeah. There you go. And this is the Century that was up on Sherland, and there was a third store on Madison Road, which is, what's the bar in the front of it now? It used to be, it was the Mansu Inn before, the restaurant that was attached to it? Yeah, there was a third Century supermarket. So this is the Sherland Avenue team at that time. Emo, is it pronounced Magnani?
Magnani.
Okay, and he had his own grocery store ultimately too. When I grew up on Kinnickinnick on the ledges. Across the street was Al Fox. He lived across, I loved Al Fox. Down the street was Sam Saladino. And Sam would, I can sit tell the story. I'm in high school and he'd come by in his Cadillac, big cigar, and I'd wave to him. And I'm thinking I'll be nice. And he'd just keep driving straight ahead, wouldn't even acknowledge me. He and my dad got into a couple of issues where Boofus needed some more porterhouse steaks or T-bones. And my Uncle Bill or my Uncle Lou Sikorsky would call my dad and say, on your way home, can you drop off these steaks? Sure. Is my dad violating any law? Yeah, can't transport retail meat across state line. And Sam caught wind of this and he turned my dad into the Department of Agriculture on it. And more or less a slap hand, but finally one day Sam's coming up the road and I'm on the lawnmower. I said to myself, Tom, it's now or never. And he goes by and I flashed him a hi. And it wasn't a good flash. And all of a sudden that Cadillac comes to a halt. I'm going, oh no, here we go. And then he pulled away. But I figured all those times I was trying to be nice and wave. It was competition, supermarket competition with those guys. And it was me acting like a high school kid. Here's the emo there. Now, where was this store located, Tony?
Say was on the corner of, I think it's right there. I want to put it on Summit. I want to put it on Summit in Wisconsin.
Okay.
Can't quote me on that one, but I think.
My wife thought it was somewhere in that neighborhood too, that area.
White building, this white house there, now there's 2 brown units.
Anybody else? Recognize the name?
I thought it was down on Sherlin. Is Sherlin, I'm long gone from Beloit, but isn't Sherlin the state line pretty much?
Pretty much.
He may have come back later in life, but he took over a grocery store in Sherlin.
Oh, he managed the Century on Sherlin for Sam Saladino. Here's some that I just couldn't get the exact addresses on 4 of them. The Bonafides. In fact, when my great-grandmother Margarita finally comes over, one of the houses they were renting had 22 boarders in it. And they took in the boarders, and she also did the laundry for the Bonafide family. But Cacciatore & Sons was just on the west side of the Grand Avenue Bridge. Anybody recognize the other grocery store names?
Well, the Barbera's you got there is the second Barbera's.
Okay,
The first Barbera's was on St. Paul and Park Avenue on the corner.
all right, St. Paul and Park.
In 100 block of Park. It was 2
Right
houses.
down by the railroad tracks then.
I was 2 houses away.
Okay,
And I think Shasha's was on the corner of Chapman and one of those east-west.
That was Lamadovas.
Okay, thank you.
Lamados's on Chapman.
Chapman
Chapman.
and Summit.
And how about Donato's?
That one I couldn't come up with.
Well,
Central.
downtown.
That was on Strong, wasn't that on Strong Avenue? Was it Donato's on
That's
Strong?
the first one.
Oh, not the first one. Cause I think it became, and then somebody made it, pizza place out of it.
Sasha's?
That was on Wisconsin and, Bayless.
I'm glad this is all being recorded, so I don't have to write it down. And then Ascani. Does that ring a bell with anybody? I'll continue checking the old Beloit City directories on those. If you're ever curious about that stuff, University of Wisconsin has a good collection of Beloit City directories.
As does the Beloit Historical Society, and a lot of them have actually been scanned and you can find them online. Not all of them, but VHS has them.
Probably everybody's favorite in here, right? Just a quick overview. I'm showing a little favoritism here. It was originally a brick bungalow on the corner of Wheeler and Gardner, and then Vito tore the porch off. And He marries my Aunt Elizabeth in 1921. He takes the front porch off, adds an addition that included a horseshoe-shaped bar, and the place originally had pool tables and tables for playing cards and socializing. As you can see by the next bullet, what happened after hours? That was down in the basement because it was done during Prohibition. Vito and Sam Garfola, how's that name? Ring a bell with that, everybody? We'll get to his place in a little bit, the 88.
Yeah.
But if you take a look, my Uncle Vito actually had the Silver Dollar Bar on State Street before Prohibition, but during Prohibition, they went into partnership together and changed it into a pool hall. And they had a very lucrative business selling bottles of booze. And one of their biggest clients was the Eagles Club in Beloit. Sam's wife was Anna Bonafide, and here's where more puzzle pieces come together. Ann's father and Vito's mother were brother and sister. So if you can piece that together. Vito was also involved in some operating stills in and around Beloit, and 2 roadhouses he had, and one of them is located right where Frank and Mike's ended up being. Some early pictures of Bufas. There's Frank bartending. I call him Newtso. He's bartending on the left, and then there he is with his sisters, Betty, Janine, and Shirley. Shirley Sikursky, Janine's, Pepto, thank you, and then Shirley Pearson. I still see Frank when he comes up to visit, so it's good to stay in touch with him. This should bring back some memories, especially if you're from South Beloit. Yeah, I was a sophomore in high school. No, April 7th year, I was finishing up my freshman year. This is before they finally decided what to put storm sewers in the town.
No storm sewers.
Yeah, no. There. Okay.
Maria, that
Bring on the stories.
You got some stories.
I do have the year right, don't I?
Yes, you do.
I got kicked out of there a few Friday nights after football games, but they always welcome us back the next week because each of us guys would order our own pizzas. And so it was a profitable table for them, and we had the meat account for that Domenico's when we had the store. Yes.
Photo was taken in '83, that's my car, and I took the photo.
Okay, and I put 73 corn up for it. Okay. Okay, thanks, Rod.
Fernandez had it, I don't know when he actually started.
Anything to add?
I'm sorry.
Anything to add about the restaurant?
Great memories.
Yeah.
A lot of great memories from high school.
A lot of us remember this whether we were of age or under. I remember we had an account with them, and my dad would stop in. We had a bunch of bar and restaurant accounts. My dad made it a point Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays to stop at one after work. He knew he was going home to 6 kids, and but my mom said dinner's 6 o'clock. I mean, it's 6 o'clock, and so he would punch out at 5. And if I was lucky to have the same schedule he did, I didn't have to work nights there. I knew we were gonna stop in and have something somewhere. So this is one of the places to stop, and I can remember Mike Jenna behind the bar always tell me, Tommy, you're a good boy. You're a good boy. I go, well, thanks, Mike. But
Now, that's the second one.
the second one,
It's not the original.
first one was across the street, right?
Anna Maria.
Anna Maria's.
That was a bad one.
And they both bartended at Bufas prior to opening up their own place.
Yeah.
Plus other stuff.
Stephanie's dad, and which would be my uncle, he bartended for years for Mike.
I attended at the Palladium and at Ethan Mike's, like, they were really great. Like, Dr. Jenna. And Chip and I did share things like this is all my whole life.
Every time I see the photo of the Palladium Bar, I'm wondering why that place is not open.
Yes, so it was all, yes, but so the Frank and Mike's was before it. And then this one, we went there.
Sam would pull up in his Cadillac, get his meat order at the store, he'd get out, big green cigar. And I always got a kick out. I'd say, Sam, how you doing? And he look at me and goes, I do nobody. And he continued walking into the store. But my parents took us there a lot for food. I like how one of the places I drew information from actually explains the architecture of the building. And how much did the sign go for?
A lot.
Was it 15,000?
16 grand.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you tell me or did Tony tell me about how 88 got its name?
My dad told me, is this myth or what? He started with $88?
Yeah.
When you got here, what, yeah, 88 bucks. That's what
Sounds good.
And he had the liquor store almost on the bridge, right?
Yeah.
He had a son that went to school with my dad, and I was talking to my dad about it. It's almost like today. You know, these phones and the high school parties. I would, if I was in high school now, I'd avoid them at all costs. But my dad said Sam's son would show up with the camera at the parties and take pictures in high school and then sell the pictures. You know? So entrepreneurship right there, Steve. Became Main Street USA,
This one that
and there was a bowling alley also with it.
Shirley and Mike on Friday.
Yes, and then he'll open up the Freeman Mansion as the manor. Any stories they had here? Okay,
And how many lanes do they have?
you would know better than me,
I don't remember. Let's hoping you would.
Rod.
James aren't his stories.
Oh, he was always a treat when he came back into town.
I believe there was only 4 lanes.
My mom, when she was little, and the Freemans owned it, my mom remembers going out there wearing the white tea dress and the white gloves for afternoon teas with my grandmother. But that was a classic place to go have dinner. And the one I wish never changed or shut down, that's the Palladium, Steve and Sally Saladino. And there was a liquor store attached with drive-up window. Yeah, the bar just sits there empty. And we can't forget bagels and more. David Sikorsky and I are cousins. Our grandmothers were sisters, Elizabeth Bufa and Mary Salomon. We tried to get him to come down here, right, Frank?
Yeah. He said he gets up at what, 4:30 in the morning?
No.
Something, I don't know. Something like that.
Yeah.
Crossing somehow
Yes.
has changed a lot.
When I was a kid, I always thought the sign out front was impressive when we drive by it.
Who remembers his brother playing the accordion?
Roy's brother?
Yeah, his brother played the accordion.
Not until it was.
Anything to add about these establishments or add one in that I forgot or Frank forgot or we missed?
I missed the Continental.
Was it owned by?
No, it wasn't. It was owned by a German guy, though. But that had the first, I believe that had the first drive-up window for a liquor store. Was the Continental.
This was a tough one. This was a tough one. Jim Gotti helped out a little bit and eBay helped me some, believe it or not. Let's hit Beloit Beverage first. You know, growing up in the family I did, it was, you build contacts obviously, but also opportunities. you wouldn't do this with your kids today. I know you wouldn't. But my dad dropped me off when I was in 8th grade. I'm still at Kinnikinnick. I wanted to see if Mr. Morello had any beer signs I could take home from my bedroom. So my dad dropped me off. I'm gonna run some errands, Tommy. Joe will take care of you. So I go in there and, Joe is much bigger than me, obviously, but he put his arm around me and gave me a whole tour of the warehouse. Now, I'm in 8th grade. And before we left, we went to the room where all the beer lights were. And he just stacked me up, my arm, with all these beer lights. And I looked at him and said, Mr. Morello, how much do I owe you? Nothing. But we also had an account. They had an account with us at the store. When my dad and his partner finally decided it's time to start selling beer at the store, it was a no-brainer. All the churches that surrounded the store. And we decided to stay open from 9 to 4 on Sundays, which was unheard of at that time. We had the fraternity houses up the hill at Beloit College, and regular customers. We had all 3 of those to draw from with our beer sales. So it proved very profitable for us. And the way they set up the store also is really how they do it a lot today. Where do you think the beer was located? Well, you had to come in the store and work your way to get to the beer. And the bet is you're going to go down the meat aisle, you're going to hit produce, you're going to hit the delicatessen before you even get to the beer. So there was times we would sell, we get a pallet load of, let's say, old style beer, and we'd sell it at a 10-cent loss per 12 pack, because on the pallet we knew we'd make that quick. We'd quickly make that up in the groceries that people were going to be buying as they're coming in to get the beer. So it was a good move. It was one that my grandfather and my dad sort of butted heads on, opening on Sundays and then also going to with the sale of beer. Any questions on? You can see the history of the Morellos. Accurate year 1960.
Should be called South Lake Beverage. It's an Illinois company.
Yeah,
That's right.
right to the south of where the McDonald's is, correct?
Well,
On State Shirley.
first beer house was on the west side of the river where that little foundry is.
That was Mark's Foundry. That was just a warehouse, though. The actual distributorship was on the other side, on Colby Street. That's where you went. The other, where you loaded up beer was over in old Mark's Foundry's building, which would have been right next to the bridge as you go on Black Hawk Boulevard.
Okay.
Mark's Foundry was right there.
Yep.
That's where they stored their beer. The offices were over on Colby. Isn't that right, Brian? Or not right?
Michael's too, over there in South.
I remember hearing that they were the primary distributor for County Stadium at one time.
Yeah.
Were they the primary distributor for County Stadium at one time?
Yeah, I mean, we were a old style distributor, and then Mr. Betts sold his business to us. Then we got Pabst. In 1987, we bought the Pabst distributorship in Milwaukee and distributed all the beer to County Stadium, Summerfest.
And the other distributorship owned by Italian, Baracco Beer Distributing. And I said, this is when I had difficulty with getting information. And thank God someone had a cigarette lighter or a lighter on eBay for sale. Because then I could, draw some information off that. I don't want to sound morbid, but I went through a lot of obituaries to pull out information. When I was doing the all-state pictures, I still do them for Hananiga for their walls. I tracked a girl down to Leroy, Illinois. She's an all-stater at Hananiga. She called me back. She goes, "How'd you find where I am?" I said, "Obituary." And she started laughing on the other end, but she was a tremendous athlete. I needed information from her before a picture went up on
The
the
other
wall.
one I could think would have had would have been Obligado Distributing, which was a Slits distributorship back then.
Okay,
That was.
that one I remember. Rod?
Maybe just to clarify, it wasn't her obituary. It was
No, it was one of her relatives. One of her relatives. You got it right. But,
Talking to the dead.
right?
I was gonna say, I live in the mother's house, and the reason I know that is that my neighbors next door on the corner of Milwaukee and Oakwood there, they moved here from California, and they've been doing a lot of remodeling, and this had to be about 4 years ago or so, maybe 5 years ago, but they got a knock on the door one afternoon, and there was an elderly gentleman out there, and he identified himself. I believe his name was Frank Baracco, and he said, "Hey, do you know you're living in my house here, or my uncle's house?" Something like that. That there was a connection there, and he had told him a couple of stories. And again, how much of this is true or not? This dates back to Prohibition, but there is a tunnel because I saw where it was all sealed up. There's just a bunch of junk that's in there that goes from that corner house out across Milwaukee Road that they said was used for storage during Prohibition. And he had some stories. Another story was that the house right across the street on Milwaukee Road supposedly was used as a lookout type of house as well, to see if police or anybody else was coming, that they would do storage down in that basement like that. And the Baraccos, I am told, Frank had mentioned this to my neighbors, that they had owned that corner there, and they had that house, and they owned all the land there going all the way to Emerson, and that's where the other brother built his house as well. So on the corner of Oakwood and on the corner of Emerson were the two brothers that had owned those homes there, and then ultimately they had parceled out that land to make other homes there and stuff like this. The home that they're in, again, it's one of these things. This is during the Depression. The house is 4 bedrooms. It's all brick, slate roof. Who builds 4-bedroom, all brick, slate roof homes during the middle of the Great Depression? You know, I don't know. The prices were really good, obviously. You know, once you think about it, like, yeah, how the hell did they do that? You know, and so yeah. So I just wanted to throw, and I think, I don't know if Frank is still living or not.
Yes,
He's
in Rockford.
He's in Rockford now. Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up, because a gentleman by the name of Daniel Teresi came to the United States at age 14, 1901. He arrives at Beloit in 1909. He ends up becoming a Beloit detective. And during Prohibition, he was one of the main detectives breaking up all the stills and illegal booze manufacturing going on in and around Beloit. He'll later go on to become the police chief of Beloit in the 1930s.
I don't know if it's Barack or not, but I'm supposed to mention this story. This earlier today, I got a text from, and it was all in Italian, from Jim Bubba Fitzgerald. Some of you might know who that is. And so basically he was saying that, hey, I'm sorry, I can't make it up there. I'd really like to be there. But he said, make sure people know, and I think it was Baracco was the last name, that on Milwaukee Road, if you go south, there's the curve on Milwaukee Road. And I think it was one of the Baraccos had his car, again, back in the 30s, there were storage tanks that they had built in there to store the liquor, the illegal liquor, and he had taken the corner too fast, and the car overturned, and there was like beer all over the place. You know, the car had just ruptured itself, and you had beer all over the place. The guy, so he said, make sure that you tell that story tonight. So I wanted to make sure to Fitzgerald that I told that story there. So
hey, a quick story about
Yes.
this just happened this weekend. We were going through his mom's basement. We came across a book of where they bought their first house in South Beloit, and the money was borrowed from Barack. And so they had all the different payments that were made. The house was $8,000.
$8,000.
The payments were $80 a month.
$80 a month. Okay.
And it was well done.
Yeah.
You
You still got it saved? No, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Joe Rock father-in-law was Dominic DiGirolamo, my grandfather's brother, and they were bootleggers. And that's all true. Mickey Baracco got married in like 1905. So, my grandfather dressed as a priest, so the policeman didn't see him. Oh, that is true.
Very creative.
Yes.
My great grandfather, segue off there, my great grandfather, Dominic Linares, the mob actually came to him out of Chicago and said, we want you to start ordering 100-pound bags of brown sugar, white sugar. And my great grandmother didn't want him to do it. And he told her, if I don't do it, it could be, you know, it could be bad. So he would order these pallets of white sugar and brown sugar stored in the storage building behind the store, South Beloit there. And my grandmother told me one day it is packed floor to ceiling. The next morning, completely empty. They would come up in the middle of the night and grab what they had to. I went down the southwest side of Rockford. You're talking about the tunnel. And I went down the southwest side of Rockford to help a friend move a mattress out of a basement of his aunt's house. And he goes, before we leave, I got to show you something. So we go down to the basement and there's a rug on the cement floor. And he pulls the rug back and there's a hatched door in the cement floor of the basement. He goes, come on. So we go down, it was brick steps going down. He hits the light switch. It's a brick arched tunnel. And we take the tunnel down to this huge room, brick. And I said, what is this? He said, this neighborhood had an underground production system going, house connected to house, where they would make wine and other liquors and that for money. But
I've already checked my basement a long time ago. There's nothing in there. I don't know. No, there's nothing there. But the neighbor's house though, has, you said the trap doors or whatever, but you got a little door, on the floor and it doesn't go anywhere, but there's shelving in there and like, oh, okay, what are you using this for? Then you got the other tunnel part and there's some great stories, who knows if they're true or not, but they're good anyways.
we had one dinner in Rockford. I told Frank this too. You're old enough to know where you are, but you're still young enough not to understand where you are. And we were at Joe Zito's house in Rockford. I called him Uncle Joe, Diamond Joe. He loved wearing jewelry and he loved wearing fancy clothes. And he was one of the top honchos, lieutenants, whatever you want to call them, in the Rockford family. And we were at their house for a Sunday afternoon get together. It was a social get together. And what I remember as a kid is I was dressed nice. My dad, who I rarely saw in a suit and tie, was in a suit and tie. And my mom was dressed real nice. My mom's sister, my grandparents were there. My mom's sister's husband was there. And all I remember is Joe laughing. He had a jovial laugh. But that's all I knew of him until I started researching all the investigations that the Rockford British Star had done on the family. And started digging, and starting to see some things that as a little kid you just didn't understand. But he always treated me nicely, when we were together. But that one incident is one that sticks in my memory.
Related to his story, when I first started taking a look at some of this topic and doing some research and all of that, I had gotten a hold of Bill Fitzgerald. And the Fitzgerald name will be very prominent in a little bit here. And he told me, as we were talking about some of the things that we're talking about right now, he said, we were talking about Frank and Mike's, and he said, Google the name, the Terrible Jennas. I never heard of this. And I said, okay. And so related to what you were just saying there, the Jennas, I believe the two brothers, now you're going back to the late 1920s and early 1930s. There was, I think, Frank and Mike Jenna, who would probably be the grandfathers maybe, or the uncles or something.
These two would be younger that had Frank and Mike.
Right, I knew that. But what was interesting about these guys, you Google the Terrible Jennas and you get this great picture out of The Godfather from the 1930s. Everybody's all dressed up. And they were the enforcers for Al Capone. But what was interesting about the Terrible Jennas was that their names, Frank was like Frank the Killer Jenna, Mike the Devil Jenna. They had really tough nicknames, It wasn't like Mikey or Frankie. There was nothing like that, it sort of fit the era of these individuals, but they were responsible for Northern Illinois and Southern Wisconsin like that as well. So Google it and that information's in there. Lee, do you have anything else you want to throw in? Okay. I just mentioned.
Anything to add on that last topic?
And you'll have some time too.
Yeah.
You'll have some time as well. When I had mentioned I was first starting this, I had started with Bill Fitzgerald. And the reason I started that with him was that I was doing some research on St. Paul's here. And St. Paul's, when I got on the Wisconsin Historical website, they have a little blurb on this. And it said it was built by William Fitzgerald. So I thought, is this any relation? So I sent the copy to Bill and I said, hey, Bill, what can you tell me about this? So we got together And he said, now you got to, and I'm going to quote Bill right now. He said, you got to remember, this is the 1800s. These guys are Irish. They drink beer. And so there's probably a little embellishment and storytelling that went on. But this is the story that Bill told me. And again, for all the Italians in this room, and St. Paul's as one of their main parishes, you got to thank the Irish for St. Paul's and St. Peter's in South Beloit. And I'll explain why in a minute. So Bill tells me this story about his great-grandfather, Michael. This is during like the 1850s in Ireland. And his great-grandfather and a friend of his, they're both, I think, around 20 years old right now. And they put together a little bit of money, and they were going to go to the farmer's market in the next town and buy a cow. So they go and they buy this cow, and they're bringing the cow back to the village. And the word he used was the local constable stops them and says, hey, where did you two guys get this cow? And they go, oh, we paid for it, the farmer's market. No, you dirty Irish. There's no way that you guys got this cow. You stole it. Well, one thing leads to another, and there's a big fight. And Bill's great-grandfather and his friend, they knock out the police officer, and they thought they killed him because the guy was just lying there. And so they hightail it back to the village. The village again. Now remember, Bill keeps going, interjecting. Now remember, people have had beer, and this, it was over 100 years old, this story. But it made it over here to America, to Beloit. And he said, the people of the town said, Mike, you got to get out of here. If they find out that you killed this police officer, they're going to hang you and your buddy. So they decide to come to America. He said they were deciding between Australia and America, and they decided to come to America. And so they were in New York for a while, and then they came over to the Midwest. And in Beloit, South Beloit area, his great-grandfather, I believe, worked like light construction, railroads, heavy duty kinds of things like this. And he ultimately started his own little construction company with his son, who would have been Bill's grandfather, who was William, right? And so Bill then says, well, St. Paul's was built by my family, the Irish, because of one of the wealthiest families in Beloit was a woman, the Broder family. In the cemetery by my house, there's this huge mausoleum on the far west side of Oakwood Cemetery. And that was built by the Broder family. And the Broder family, now remember, this is now we're into the late 1800s, 1900, right around in there. And one of the Broder sisters marries a Protestant. They're Catholic. They belong to St. Thomas. A lot of the Irish belong to St. Thomas. And there was a pastor there, Father Michael Ward, something like this. And there was a falling out with that pastor because Bill said, number one, he opposed the marriage of the daughter who was marrying a Protestant. And he also was very big in the early temperance movement. And so he was very anti-alcohol at this time. Again, Bill's saying, the family, they everybody liked to drink and party and all these kind of things like this. And so the family with the split decided at the time, Beloit, the amount of people that were coming into Wisconsin from Italy and from Sicily, and there's some great websites here that I can share with you later on. You found a lot of Italians that were in northern Wisconsin because of the mining in iron and in Barron County. And then Milwaukee. Those were like the top three around 1850, 1880. And then it really starts to change as probably a lot of our ancestors all started to come into America and then ultimately into, let's say, the Midwest and into Beloit like this. And so the Broder family, who was very wealthy, they were upset and angered with the Irish. They were Irish themselves with St. Thomas. So somehow they got a hold of the Fitzgerald Construction Company, gave them the money sort of as a slap in the face to the Irish parish so that the Italian immigrant parish of St. Paul's can be built. A little bit earlier, there were 40 families in South Beloit, and that was a mission parish as well, which the Fitzgeralds also built. So the Irish really started the Italian community here in terms of the place of worship. St. Paul's is named after Paul Broder, who I've looked some of this up, but some of you know the story that they found him. He was a Notre Dame grad and he was a lawyer. This is the early 1900s. And they found him dead at the bottom of the stairs of his home. And they don't know if he slipped, if he had a stroke, if somebody pushed him from behind. They have no idea. It's one of these mysteries that existed. And so the other sister, who was a devout Catholic, decided that we'll get the money to build this parish right here for immigrant families, but we're going to name it St. Paul in honor of my brother. Not so much St. Paul the saint, but Paul the brother like that as well. And so St. Peter's in South Beloit, there was no other brother that I came across that was Peter in there, all right? So, yes.
I just want to say that Bill was here for our last presentation on the Irish in Beloit. He told a very similar version of the story of how his great-grandfather
Yes,
left there.
right.
And he sends his regrets, but he's at a meeting at church that I'm not at, so he's
Yeah, the part of that story with Australia or America was that supposedly they flipped a coin, and his great-grandfather called it, and so he had the chance to say America or Australia, and he decided we're going to America. And so that's, otherwise the story would never exist. They'd be somewhere in Australia right now. So now the story gets interesting once this parish is up and running, because they have an Italian pastor, Father Alfredo Giovanoni is his name, was the first pastor that was there. But now where the story sort of turns is that I was talking to my friend Steve Kadamian over here, who is from Kenosha, originally, and I wish Bob Truniglia and any of you that are from the Madison area might know an area where Italians had lived called the Greenbush area, because both Kenosha and the Greenbush of Madison is directly related to this parish right here. This is how. Well, in Kenosha, I think it's called the Church of the Holy Rosary of Our Lady of Pompeii, where in Milwaukee, there's an Our Lady of Pompeii where my parents, I was baptized there, was a Italian immigrant parish as well, the Third Ward, not that far away from, if you know where the Summerfest grounds are. There's now the highway that goes over it. And so anyways, another story. So anyways, in Kenosha, there was a pastor that was there, Father Pietro, I think his last name was Perotti. And there was some issues with him. Again, this is about 1921. I'm going to read a headline in a minute. Around 1921, there were some issues with the pastor there, because some of the parishioners felt that he was embezzling some of the funds, and there was something with land that the parish owned that the parishioners felt that this pastor was taking advantage of them. And so a crowd, it said, of about 100 to 200 had gathered, this is in Kenosha at the parish, by the rectory, to protest and have the priest come out so that they could talk to him. Now, I'm not sure why these Italians and Sicilians did this, but it said that the crowd swelled to about 1,000. And they started singing the Star Spangled Banner before they went and they attacked the rectory. The priest, this is the Kenosha, let me read the headline from Kenosha right here, all right? This is Kenosha riot, April 11th, 1921. Here's the headline. Church fight ends in riot. Police rescue priest from riotous throng. And so what happened was the priest goes back into the rectory. I believe it was his sister and the cleaning woman with 2 small children. It said that the sister and the cleaning woman had brandished pistols on the crowd that was trying to break in. The police come, this sounds like a movie. The police come, they rescue him, they get some car, and they drive him away to some safe zone there where the parishioners couldn't get after him. Well, where does Madison come in now? Well, this priest, the Archbishop of Milwaukee at the time, if you ever heard of Mesmer High School, the first Archbishop of Milwaukee was Bishop Mesmer, who was German and Swiss. And so he decided that the best thing to do, he couldn't allow this priest to go back to this parish, so he appointed another Italian priest to come to the one in Kenosha. He moved Father Pietro up to Madison, to the Greenbush area, church, I think it was St. James that was up there, and he was there for a couple of years. And then St. Paul's needed a pastor, and so the priest from up there then came over here to Beloit, and then really started to get that church going there. A couple of things about that, and a little bit more within the last 30 or 40 years, though the church has been around since 1914. I said I was in Beloit here now since 1979, and one of the things, and my sisters could probably attest to this in terms of how we grew up in Milwaukee, a very Sicilian family. We lived upstairs from my grandparents, an aunt and a great uncle, and English upstairs was the first language. Sicilian, I was passing around some of the dialect over here, was the main language down there. And so that type of environment and the food that I ate and all of this, and my dad belonged to a Holy Name Society at Our Lady of Pompeii, I found a lot of the same things here in town as well. And I remember going to Mass on occasion with Gail's husband, Terry, and meeting a guy by the name of Father Joe DiStefano. And little did I know that from college, I'd ultimately be coming back to Beloit, because I left Beloit then. I was working up in Madison for a while. I did a little stint overseas. And I come back to Beloit. Father Pat Swindrowski was a pastor that had hired me. And it was just like at home, because in terms of Father D, he'd invite a lot of the college kids over for spaghetti or Italian sausage and peppers. And he had a lot of different meals like that. And Terry and I, like, yeah, we don't want to, let's take advantage of this. But when I came here to Beloit and I was working at Catholic High, I got to meet a number of Italians there, and names you probably might remember. Frank DeSarbo was one. The Terranova brothers, your dad and your uncle Cos, they called him Coke, Cosmo, and Steve. Her uncle, if there's one thing, I joined the Holy Name Society at, if you remember, the Newman Center. There was a Newman Center that is now a daycare right off campus there. And once a month, the Holy Name Society would have a dinner and a social hour. And so it was just like at home, and go there, and your Uncle Coke over there, his cigarette would be in his mouth, and he'd have the longest ashes ever. They would never fall. And there's one story with the Holy Name that really symbolized probably Milwaukee and other Italian enclaves, was that every year there'd be this big spaghetti dinner. I remember working outside with the big kettles of hot water, with usually beer in my hand and a cigar, and usually one or two of my college buddies, and we helped out spaghetti dinners that way. Joe Sorrentino, you probably remember that name as well. And so the spaghetti dinner, there's one spaghetti dinner, and I remember your dad and your uncle arguing over, this is the honest to God truth, the size and the shape of the noodle that they should have. Is it going to be Mustacholi number 10? Is it going to be Mustacholi number 9? We need a thicker noodle. We need this, and people are laughing. And I mean, these guys were serious about the kind of thing that they would have like that. And then afterwards, there'd be a social hour. And there was a couple things I remember about that. Some of you might know this card game. There's an Italian card game called Briscola. And Briscola, you play with 4, and basically you and your partner are changing hands, and you've got high signs like, oh, I got a heart, or, I've got the king, and, you got a lot of things like this. It's a legitimate, it's legal cheating as part of the game. And so these guys would play it. And I got from my grandfather the Italian deck, where you got the number and you got a picture of a king, or you got a picture of a queen, or, this kind of stuff like this. And then one night they had a fight night. And not people fighting in the Newman Center, but somebody brought in guys from the 1950s, and it was reel to reel, black and white, up on the wall like that. And I remember one of the names, Two-Ton Tony Galento. I have no idea what it was, but it was this Italian Rocky Marciano. They had all these fighters, and I thought, man, this is pretty cool. I really enjoy this kind of stuff like this. And so my memories of St. Paul is very, very good. I have at home my daughter Gabriel. I should mention something real quick too with my daughter Gabriel and some of my ex-students over here. My daughter Gabriel is 40 years old right now. It's hard to believe that you guys were at school there when she was born. We used to go to Barbera's. Barbera's up on Bayless had a tiny restaurant. I don't know if any of you knew that, about the size of this corner over here. I think there's 2 or 3 tables. But one of the professors at the college, John Junk, had told us that, hey, did you guys ever go to Barbera's to eat lunch? Like, no, never. Didn't know they had that. We knew they had a bakery. He said, oh no, in a liquor store. Go up there. They've got these great eggplant sandwiches on fresh Italian bread. So we'd go up there, and my daughter Gabriel was probably under the age of 1 or about 1. She was in one of those walkers. And so I remember writing when Mrs. Cacciatore had died. She belonged to Ole, where I belonged. And I had wrote a little message about, and it's something like this, that nowhere else in Beloit could a young couple go and give their young daughter to Mrs. Cacciatore and her mother. I believe it was her mother. I said, 2 nonnas, 2 attentive nonnas, because we'd put her in the walker with her bottle, we'd have lunch, And then the two ladies would go, oh, you go eat, we'll take care of her. And then my daughter would just walk around through the liquor aisles and the food. You know, it was awesome. Where else do you find that kind of family, kind of outreach like that? It was really, really good. So I have some really good memories of the parish right here and what had happened. And I was also going to mention, I have Gabriel and my son Salvatore. I've got Gabriel, Salvatore, and then Anthony. And I believe my son Salvatore, who was born in '87 and was baptized by Father DiStefano, was probably the last baptism, because shortly thereafter, Father D leaves to go back home to Altoona, Pennsylvania. He was very ill at the time, and he passed away, I believe, in November. He passed away in 1988. 1988, he passed away. So, and I have that. The good thing about that is, for me at least, I've got that in film. You know, the big old cameras back during that era, the 80s. He came to our house. We'd asked if he would do it in our house, and we invited some of the aunts and uncles, and and we did the baptism of my daughter Gabriel, and then a different place that we invited him in to do the baptism for Sal. And typical Father DiStefano, those of you that know him, he would give you a history lesson. So I'm going to use the holy oil right here. The holy oil comes from this, and then he'd have a big story about that, and the baby's crying, and then he puts it on, and all those kind of things like this. But it's a great memory that I have, and the connection that I had, which I am sure a lot of you people in this room had the same connection as well, because the church served as a real hub for the Italian community at that point in time. And like I said, you really had, by 1920, I believe, was the peak in terms of immigration to the United States by the Italians coming through Ellis Island or through the port of New Orleans like that, and then ultimately ending up here in Wisconsin. And then again, for some of the people in Beloit, a number of people I know started in Milwaukee, but the railroad at that time was also starting to move west and starting to not only across the state to Dubuque, but up to the Twin Cities and then down to Chicago, and they needed a lot of cheap labor. So a lot of the Crivellos, and probably a lot of people in this room, some of your ancestors, all worked on the Milwaukee Road or the Chicago Northwestern Railroad as well, and putting in a lot of those tracks. So if you ever drive by on 43, by Clinton there, you've got the Pelishek Trail. That was, I believe, the Milwaukee Road that went through there.
From the Fairbanks.
Yeah, any stories? Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as an Italian American myself and the current owner of this building.
Yes, I know.
It's been a pleasure to invest into this space, invest into the history of preserving the building. We did just find a license plate from 1925 yesterday, which was very cool. As we were taking out the stairs and patio.
Wow. I know who you are. Could you introduce yourself? I bet you know people don't.
I'm Celestino Graffini, the CEO of Visit Beloit and owner of 656 Plus. So, in a fourth generation Italian.
Real quick before you change this picture here, in the back there, you guys are doing construction and you're adding on,
Yeah,
believe.
the addition there on the south side of the building will happen eventually. We just reopened the building. The sanctuary is now a new events venue for about 200 people. Our offices are in the lower level where many spaghetti dinners.
Yeah, that's what I think. You had to miss the spaghetti dinners when they were downstairs.
Right.
That's when it was really fun. You thought the kitchen was fun then.
Oh yeah, I just remember the ones at Beloit Catholic.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
And,
that's what I was intimating. I worked at the Beloit Catholic once.
Keep going.
Oh,
Go ahead. I'll segue off.
Oh,
and make
okay.
a quick comment.
do you have that picture that I showed you about the skin whitener?
That's coming up.
Oh, that's coming up. All
Yeah.
right. The Italians at Fairbank Morse over here. This over here, I heard something similar in Milwaukee as well about teaching English. There is one of my cousins had made an interview talking to my grandmother and my Aunt Mary and my Aunt Nina. This was back in 1987, and he wanted them to tell stories. And one of the things that was on there was that my mom, Josephine, is the oldest, and she was the one that first went to school. My grandmother had mentioned that she thinks back in Sicily, she was in school for like 2 to 3 years. So third grade education, let's say, something which was very, very common, all right? And they had mentioned in there that my mom would go to, I think it was called Jackson Street School in Milwaukee, near the old Summerfest grounds, and would come home with the English that she had learned, because English really wasn't spoken yet in the house down in the third ward for probably 99% of the families like this. And so this makes a lot of sense as well about the whole idea of acclimating immigrants into this country and what can you do for those immigrants like this. Up on the wall over there, and this is, you don't have to read the whole thing. There's like many, I think it's 41 volumes. In 1911, there was something called the Dillingham Report. And I found this because the guy underneath this, Joseph Giordano, this author who's still alive, he grew up in Brooklyn, New York, has written a number of books about the Italian experience and all of this. He had some information on this, and I really wasn't quite familiar with this report right here, but it was a report by Congress they were worried about the amount of Southern Europeans coming into this country around this time period, around 1911. And it's kind of funny in a way, and it's kind of sad in a way, if you look at some of the writing in here of the report, that there was a section on Northern Italians and there was a section on Southern Italians. The Northern Italians seemed to be wealthier, they were educated, more stable. If you look at the Southern Italians, they said were unstable. They didn't take authority well, just a number of different things. But you got to remember that in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the unification of Italy, you've got the mafia, you've got the Black Hand, you've got Cosa Nostra, you've got all these kind of things like this. And so there was a real feeling that the North was where people, if you came from Italy, especially in the northern parts, you were seen to be socioeconomically a lot higher than you were with the people of the South, because you take a look at the island of Sicily, at least for my grandparents, they were all fishermen. It was a very rugged country. I mean, there was some farming, but if you live near the water, that's basically what you did like that as well. So getting back to this over here, I mean, this makes perfect sense to get some of these people naturalized and to teach people English as well. Yeah.
Bring a point up about what I failed to mention, when my grandfather, Bill Salomone, came from Sicily, there was a reason he came, and it wasn't necessarily what was drawing him over here as an opportunity. His father was also a butcher. And twice, he also had cattle. And twice, the mafia took his herds. And the second time, my grandfather was coming home from somewhere and found his father had hung himself in the barn. So he had been driven to that point, of desperation, and that was enough to push my grandfather then to seek opportunity over here and get out of Sicily. Some of our family did live in northern Italy, in the Genoa area. So we were split, from one extreme to the other.
If anybody's from northern Italy here, in terms of your relatives, I'm not criticizing you at all. I'm just trying to give you a sense of the way it was at that moment in time as well. And part of that story too, and I think everybody's got that story as well. The grandmother that I was talking about, my grandmother Rosina, who had been my mom's mother, when they left Sicily, this had to be around 1920, I think, somewhere around in there for the very first time. And she, in broken English and Sicilian, saying when she left with her two sisters, she would have been, oh man, it depends. She said she was born in 1900. My aunts thought she was born in the 1890s, but there's no record of that. So let's just say that she's 16, 18 years old coming over at this time. Her parents were both dead, I think by the time she was 8 or 9. So she was raised by her older sister and one of the grandmothers. And she said when they left Sicily, they had to go to a port in Italy. And then from Italy, they came over to America. It was about 16 days to get to Ellis Island. And, I think of these things like that, man, everybody in this room and our ancestors, I mean, just think of the journey to get over here in terms of what they had to do. And they were, in steerage and all, they were living in first class on these boats. You've seen all these pictures and what have you, people all, bundled up and trying to make it across the ocean like this. But it was 16 days that it took before she ended up over here as well. And then this number, here's your sources over there. I had never read this book. I heard about this. Do you want to say something about it?
Well, yeah, it provides just an additional history of what was going on with the industrialization that was happening at Fairbanks right, during the early part of the 20th century. It's interesting that when the first Italians come to Beloit in 1901, and it wasn't a flood like the Great Migration of blacks coming up from northeast Mississippi between 1915 and 1920. But in any large factory environment, there's a pecking order. And once Fairbanks management is convinced by John McCord and at first, and then Walter Ingram second, they were the two main recruiters of black migrants out of northeast Mississippi. Once they realized they could save 5 to 6 cents per man hour, they knew they had a readily available source of labor in the South to bring up. That was really maybe the springboard for the Italians that were working in the foundry to finally have some sense of opportunity, hopefully, to get out of the foundry and get into a more skilled position within the factory. It all falls together. I am glad Frank brought this information to my attention, because when you see Italians at Fairbanks naturalized an alien 185, blacks 229. This is as of 1923, and really by 1920, 1921, I think the total factory enrollment at Fairbanks was 4,700 in the factory. It was quite complex up there, and if you were a kid growing up, you remember the big red brick foundry that was on the north end of the ABC headquarters, which was also a foundry that was built. That huge brick foundry had its own wind currents in it. It was that big of a building. And that's, the Italians out there really first, and then the blacks that were recruited to come north, especially during the war years, to fill the void. Did you want to go to that one last slide, or?
Yeah, let's go to the last one.
Come on. Oh, quick on the working conditions there. You didn't have OSHA. And if you worked in the brass foundry, you might as well say goodbye to your life by your mid-40s. No true ventilation. Brass chills was a common occurrence. I don't know if you've ever heard of brass chills. You knew if you had it, if you broke out in a sweat at night, and when you got up in the morning, your bed sheets had a greenish tint to them. So it was tough. And that's where most of the blacks were working, was in the brass foundry also. And the only known antidote at the time was alcohol. So a lot of the blacks that worked in that part of the factory ultimately become alcoholics just to get through the brass chills, which could happen anywhere from 2 to 3 months, once every 2 to 3 months. And Fairbanks finally does put a doctor in there full time. But putting a doctor in there and solving the issue are two different things. But there were several, as Frank points out here, long-term health problems, especially in the foundry area and in the powerhouse. Fairbanks generated its own power. That powerhouse went 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The boilers had to be fed, or the furnaces had to be fed for the power. I like this.
We came across this, if you can't see too well, this is Dr. Fred Palmer's skin whitener. Whitens dark or brown skin. And this appeared, right, you've got some of it right over here as well. Grouped in lower social classes, people trying to assimilate into American society. I'm 100% Sicilian. I don't fit the stereotype at all. Of what, my brother was shaving, I think, in what, 5th grade, 6th grade? Honest to God. My parents are gone, so my brother, as a freshman in high school, was buying his older brother and his friend's beer at that moment in time. So anyways, you take a look at this and you go, how did this happen? Well, you got to think of the era that you're living in right now. A report like that, people read this and they're thinking, oh my God, think of all these people that are coming in from Southern Europe and all of this. Now remember, World War I doesn't exist yet. That's still about, a few years off the mark like that. But this is right before World War I, where you have huge amounts of Southern Europeans that are now starting to come into the United States as well. And so again, as part of the assimilation, you had advertisements like this for people like, hey, make yourself a lot more American by lightening your skin like this also. So anybody want to mention anything on this here, or you have anything else here?
What great timing.
Oh,
One,
is this the last one?
Yeah.
Oh,
in the Italian culture, I guess in any true ethnic culture though, there's a thing called family and continuing on with something, a tradition, or for me, in 1985, I had just gotten divorced. I had my son with me and just taking the head track job at Hononegah and finishing up graduate school. And my dad comes to me and says, I want you to go into partnership with me at the store. And we met at Buffa's, a perfect meeting spot for business discussion. Relatives owned it. And it was Wednesday. It was always seemed like it was a big family reunion there before dinner actually got started there. And I said, I got to think about this. And I knew when I ultimately said no, I was the last in line, that the family tradition was going to end. I had nothing against working in the store or possibly owning it. I was just having too much fun teaching and coaching. And it was a good gig for 33 years. But my dad was happy. He came back to me a couple days later. He goes, I'm so happy. He said, no. I go, why? He goes, I'm selling my share. And coincidental or not, a year later, Cub Foods announced they're coming into Beloit. So he pulled the cord at the right time. But a couple years later, he asked me, what would you have done differently with the store? Keep it open. I said, we would have said goodbye to the groceries. I said we would have kept the meat, the produce, the bakery and deli, and we would have gone 2 aisles of Italian specialties, and the rest of the store would have been beer, wine, and liquor because we had a full basement for inventory. I said we would have put the pressure on the other liquor stores in the area by doing that. And offering everything else, the produce, the meat, deli, and the bakery, and I'll possibly go catering on the side. And he looks at me like, why didn't you come up with this idea? And sooner he might have stayed. But I only regret it because it ended the family line there. I don't regret it because I ended up with a pretty good career. But anything else, Frank? You go ahead and bring the closure. Rod? No, Frank, go ahead and bring the closure.
I just wanted to ask a question. I didn't see or hear anything about these stickers. Are they Italian or not?
That I couldn't answer.
Yeah, Mickey Paranello?
Yes.
I guess it was.
So I missed one. I missed one.
Where was that located?
Right across from Fairbanks.
Oh.
Mix of donors.
And the Cardi had it after.
Al.
Oh, we're old fashioned.
Yeah.
Yes.
Carnello had it first, Mickey, and then
Store up there.
Nick Cardi had it afterwards.
Oh my God. That's right across the street.
What other questions do you have, or not questions, but statements that you have, or stories that you've got that you want to tell us? Go ahead.
The officer.
Can everybody hear him?
So the officer you were talking about prohibition 30s?
Yes.
Okay. Eddie Austin lived in the corner of 8th and Union, or one house. They had somebody in the neighborhood that made alcohol. Okay. That officer lived in that area, so did his children. So this guy, once a week, would put out in his front yard a big barrel of root beer and cream soda on ice for any kid in the neighborhood to come and have. That cop never touched that guy. He never busted that guy. He knew he was running a beer establishment, but he put out.
But look what he's doing for the children of the neighborhood.
Give me that.
That's right. Yes.
You briefly touched on reasons that Italians came over here to America. And a story that I heard from my mother's family, the Lombardos from South Beloit, was that my grandfather fought in the First World War and he had a terrible, terrible experience. And after that, he decided we're going to get the heck out of here and move to the promised land. And so he brought my grandmother and my mother and my aunt over here. And they pulled into New York Harbor, the port of New York, and they wouldn't let them off the boat. And they had to spend 2 or 3 days on the boat. They wouldn't let them off, and they couldn't figure out why. Why is this? Something wrong? Are they going to send us back? And then all of a sudden, one night, in the middle of the night, all kinds of bombs and explosions were going off. And they thought, oh my gosh, we gave up everything we owned in the old country to come over here for peace and tranquility. And they later found out it was the 4th of July.
I want to just touch base with that. If any of you ever get a chance to go to New York, I don't know if anybody's ever been to Ellis Island. I was at Ellis Island about 20, 30 years ago. It was a very cloudy day, taking the ferry out there. I was by myself, and we get off the boat, and you get right there where the pier is, and then there's the building and the steps. And so you're getting off, and a bunch of people got off, and they run up the steps. But I'll always remember this because there's about 5 or 6 of us, probably all about the same age, and we got off, and we all just scattered. We just stopped, and we just looked at this building. And I'm sure that every one of us, including myself at the time, was thinking, boy, these were the steps where my grandparents got. They got off the boat, they walked here, they didn't know where the hell they were going, what they had to do. I told you about my grandmother before, very young. She and her sister had to go from Ellis Island to New York, and then somehow get a train. They knew no English and probably had no money, and make it to Milwaukee area as well, which they did. I don't know how, but they did like that. But it's just a phenomenal experience, and boy, it's a really neat place to look up your family and all those kind of things like that as well. So other things that you people want to bring up tonight?
I'm just gonna pass around that photo. I've
Oh.
told you.
Yes, why don't you explain it?
I don't know if anybody's heard about it. It was an Italian social club back in the days in the early 50s. Lady Muta Club. I'll pass it around, and I'm sure when you see it, you're gonna notice a lot of Italian names that are in there that you're gonna know that are in the community today or are relatives of yours. You probably hadn't seen this picture. I know of only one other one in the city. This was of my uncle's, my last uncle passed away a few years ago, and if you see somebody on there and the name that's wrong or something, don't hesitate to fill it in and help me out a little.
He mentioned Legamuta Society.
Yeah.
Trying to find the literal translation of that is something like strength and unity, something along those lines. And we didn't mention it, but the social clubs, I remember Mr. Licata taking me upstairs at where Trucked is right now, was I think an Italian club, Italian American club. The Northern Italians, or the people from Italy, had a club called the Humanities Club. And then the Southern Italians and the Sicilians had their own club, Legamuta, somewhere else like that.
Legamuta itself was located straight across from the old Freeman, the original Freeman Shoe Company. Okay, on St. Paul Avenue. Okay, and if you went further, you would have hit Mill Street. Okay, so it was right there. It later became the Greyhound bus station on St. Paul Avenue.
I'm gonna give us a break for those who thought that this was gonna end at 8 and need to be somewhere else. But and then those who want to talk some more and ask some more questions or tell their own stories are welcome
Yeah.
to stay. Couple things. One is I want to thank Donna Langford, who's the director of the Beloit Historical Society. If you are interested in the Historical Society, she's got our newsletter, which always has fun stories about Beloit's history, as well as our membership brochure, just in case you'd like to keep in touch with us by being a member, and then you get the newsletter. And also, as I'm thinking about this, I'm looking at all of these photos and documents. If you have stuff from your grandparents and you are thinking, I don't know what to do with this, and my kids are just going to throw it away, but I don't want it to be thrown away, that's what historical societies are for. And if you have things that are related to your family's history in Beloit, talk to Donna or find the Beloit Historical Society website or whatever you need to do. But I'm just thrilled that so many of you are here, especially family and friends of Frank's and Tom. And so I want to thank both of you again. And I didn't bring by nearly enough refreshments for this many people because we've never had this many people. And if you have stories you want to tell about Beloit, about places you worked or places you lived, we're going to keep this up in the fall. My colleague is reminding me that there are evaluation forms on the table. it's very useful for us to know what kinds of events are successful. You can leave them on the tables or give them to Donna on your way out. I think she has a box even, yes.
I know I speak for Tom too. We want to thank you and you for including us and asking if we would do something like this.
And
It's been
Betsy, who
great.
ultimately makes it all happen.
Yes.
So.